Ready to go? I'll call to order the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology, and I apologize for the delay in getting started. We had some votes and a couple of member things I got to deal with, but we're here now. When we last convened to discuss FirstNet, my goal was to leave that hearing with a higher level of comfort with regard to FirstNet's progress and confidence in the way it was conducting its business. As we all recognize then and continue to acknowledge today, FirstNet has before it an undertaking which rivals the network deployments of our largest national carriers. In fact, given its mandate to build an interoperable wireless broadband service for all of our nation's first responders, its task will take to all corners of the United States. Now, early shortcomings in FirstNet's approach to consultation with states and other interested parties had resulted in considerable uncertainty and concern among stakeholders. Confused messaging, a perceived lack of transparency, and unanswered questions regarding FirstNet's vision for the network and even FirstNet vision for itself further complicated things. Questions like, how would FirstNet provide service? Would it build a network or partner with commercial carriers? What is FirstNet going to charge, and how does the opt-out work? Each contributed to the concerns raised at the hearing, and answers were far from forthcoming. And on top of all the policy concerns, FirstNet was also under investigation by the Inspector General of the Department of Commerce into alleged conflicts of interest and contracting concerns when we gavelled in last time. Now, much has happened since then. There's been some turnover in management, and with the release of the IG's report in December of last year confirming much of what we feared, that FirstNet had been operating without proper processes in place and without compliance with the laws that guard against impropriety. It is my hope that the missteps are now behind us, and I believe they are. But that's not to say that there aren't additional challenges. On April 28th, the U.S. Government Accountability Office released a report on FirstNet's progress in establishing the network, concluding that while FirstNet has made progress carrying out its responsibilities, weaknesses in FirstNet's internal controls remain. For example, it remains unclear how FirstNet is internalizing the lessons learned from the early builder projects. Those are the 5 jurisdictions that are already deployed or deploying public safety broadband networks using FirstNet spectrum. And while the GAO report recommends fixes, it is GAO's succinct statement of what lies ahead that must inform our oversight. FirstNet faces a multitude of risks, significant challenges, and difficult decisions in meeting its statutory responsibilities, including how to become a self-funding entity. To give FirstNet credit, it has made progress. We witnessed FirstNet's information collections and consultation and outreach activities accelerate through 2014. The feedback gathered has informed discussions on deployment and brought productive debate among all stakeholders. Today's hearing reflects the subcommittee's commitment to continued and thorough oversight of FirstNet. We all share the goal of ensuring that our nation's first responders realize the promise of truly interoperable, state-of-the-art emergency communications networks envisioned by the law. With those early missteps behind us today, we look not only at the progress FirstNet has made, but also what new challenges lie ahead. Our goal being to leave with a higher level of comfort in FirstNet's progress and confidence in the way it's conducting its business. So I look forward to hearing from Mr. Kennedy, who can provide an update on FirstNet's progress, put some of the pieces together, and share with more specificity developments in FirstNet's considerations and visions for the public safety broadband network. I also would like to thank Mr. Davis for appearing a second time before the subcommittee to share his experience as a state chief information officer and his assessment what needs improvement and where FirstNet is headed. With that, I turn to the vice chair of the subcommittee, Mr. Latta, for any opening comments that you may have.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And again, thanks for holding today's hearing. And again, thanks to our witnesses for being back with us today. Really appreciate it, especially Mr. Davis coming from Ohio. And, pardon me, public safety and emergency communications are critical to protecting the lives of Americans. That is why we must ensure that the implementation of FirstNet is very successful. A reliable nationwide network is essential for first responders to facilitate their communication needs and support their everyday missions. While I understand developing a nationwide interoperable public safety network is a significant undertaking, it is imperative that it's properly established to meet the needs of all Americans, especially our first responders. Furthermore, I'm eager to see the future developments as consultations are underway to better incorporate the state's input into planning and implementation of the broadband network. Mr. Chairman, I look forward to today's hearing, and again, thank our witness for appearing.
Thank you for your comments and leadership. Turn now to the ranking member, my friend from California, Ms. Eshu, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. It's been a year and a half since our subcommittee last held a FirstNet oversight hearing, and progress has been made. I think that we have a lot of questions, obviously, since we haven't been together for a year and a half to do the oversight that needs to be done. But we look forward to, I look forward to asking those questions, and I'm sure that my colleagues do as well. Now, in terms of progress, I think amongst the biggest milestones include the release of a strategic roadmap, ongoing collaboration with states, and most recently, the draft request for proposals intended to provide FirstNet with extensive stakeholder input. And that's, in my book, that's that's really key. You have to talk to customers. If you're not in touch with customers, your company or endeavor is going to flop, in my view. So thanks to the success of the recently completed AWS 3 auction, FirstNet will soon have the funds it needs to deliver on the first ever nationwide interoperable public safety network. And I remind everyone that this was the one recommendation of the 9/11 Commission that the Congress had not made good on, but we did for the American people. So a lot rides on this effort. A lot rides on this effort. And we got the money for you. And did the legislation. It became law, and we want to make sure that this is not only done, but done very well, because it's a very big deal. It's a big deal for our country. Going forward, I think there are three key areas which FirstNet's leadership should give special consideration to. First, I think it's critical that wireless carriers of all sizes have an opportunity to partner with FirstNet. Just be an equal opportunity outfit, in my view. In particular, regional and/or rural providers will have an important role to play, both in building the network as well as being able to provide consumers with enhanced wireless broadband service when the network is not needed by emergency personnel. Second, device competition is critical to the success of FirstNet. $5,000 public safety radios are out, O-U-T. So I don't want to hear about them anymore. As far as I'm concerned, they don't exist, and I don't think any of the dollars that are being provided should go to anything like that. That is yesterday. What's in? Highly innovative broadband-enabled devices that can transmit live video from a robot sent to, for example, to assess a suspicious package, view floor plans of a burning building, access medical history of a patient in distress, as well as the wide range of other mobile applications. In other words, you have to be just as 21st century as the rest of the of this ecosystem is in our country. These devices have to be truly interoperable and capable of withstanding the physical challenges that first responders face every day. And finally, I think that FirstNet should ensure its core operations align with the standards and the technologies related to next generation 911. Congressman Shimkus has been a great advocate, a co-chair of the E911 caucus. We've been working on these issues for more years than we want to count, and so there has to be alignment with that operation. The call centers around the country are upgrading to NG911, and they're becoming capable of receiving photos and videos and text messages. So it only makes sense that this information can be seamlessly transmitted to first responders headed to an emergency situation. So your operations have to be absolutely aligned. So as we work toward advancing the next generation of public safety communications, I want to thank you for the work that you've already done, for what you're going to do, and for being here today to testify and give us a good deep dive on where things are and how you see the future. Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, gentlelady, and I'd like to insert in the record a letter from the Rural Broadband Association, without objection. Turn now to the Vice Chair of the full committee, the gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you all for being here to give us an update. As the chairman said in his comments, this is something we have followed. We'll continue to follow and do appropriate oversight with you. We are so focused on your funding mechanism, how you move to self-funding after that initial tranche of money is exhausted, and then how you are going to see that business model developing. Also, the issue of interoperability. Those of us that have worked through the issues of some of our natural disasters want to make certain that that is being addressed, and that the stakeholders with all of the first responders across the country are going to understand, participate, and that we're going to realize this objective of having something that is interoperable. The other thing I want to touch on, and I'll get to this in my questions a bit more, the aspects of a secure network. We are realizing more and more the importance of having a secure network. And of course, we realize closed systems, we're going to deal with those one way. Enterprise systems another way. When you look at something that needs the interoperability component that you're going to have, the security of the system is just so important to us. We are living in an age where we face cyber attacks, not just on a monthly basis, a weekly basis, but an hourly basis. So please talk with us about this issue of security. It is a heightened concern for us as we move into the age of the Internet of Everything and look at 50 billion devices being attached by the time we get to the end of this decade. So that secure wireless network that is the goal, we want to be certain that indeed it is secure, and hear from you as much as you can divulge to us how you are achieving that. With that, I will yield the balance of my time to anyone who is seeking time. No takers? Time goes back
No
to
takers.
Mr. Chairman. I
And I'm-
yield back.
And the gentlelady yields back, and I'm told the ranking member of the full committee has asked Ms. Matsui to take his time, so I now recognize the gentlelady from California.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding Mr. Pallone's time to me. First of all, let me say FirstNet is a startup. Now, let's not forget that. Like every startup, it's had its growing pains. For so long, there were questions on how FirstNet will be funded, but now we know that it will be fully funded and will be operational due to this subcommittee's diligent work on the AWS-3 record-setting spectrum auction. Last year, FirstNet laid out a roadmap, and I am pleased that they are hitting their milestones so far. From the beginning, I remained focused on the need for a strong governance structure at FirstNet to responsibly govern any nationwide public safety interoperability network. Despite some initial concerns about the role of states taking a back seat, I'm pleased that the FirstNet board took this issue head-on and developed a strong, coordinated relationship with the states. It is my hope that we can work together in a bipartisan manner to achieve success for America's first responders. And I yield to anyone on my side who'd like to take the rest of the time. No. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back balance for time. We'll go to our witnesses now and start with Mr. T.J. Kennedy, Acting Executive Director, First Responder Network Authority. We want to thank you for your leadership and appreciate the progress that you have been making, and please go ahead with your comments.
Thank you, Chairman Walden, Ranking Member Eshoo, members of the subcommittee. Really appreciate being here on behalf of the First Responder Network Authority. I welcome the opportunity to brief you on FirstNet's progress and the development of deploying an interoperable nationwide public safety broadband network. It's also a pleasure to appear here today with the CIO of the state of Ohio, Stu Davis. We just recently conducted the Ohio consultation last week in Ohio, and his team has been very active, not just in Ohio itself, but even within the region, in setting a great example for our country and how to make this network possible. I would like to welcome several members of the public safety community who join us here today. This network is all about them. When we put reliable, resilient broadband technology in the hands of police officers, firefighters, emergency medical services personnel across this country, we will enhance public safety like never before. We will create new ways that first responders can save lives and improve first responders' own safety. As this committee is aware, we are experiencing growing pains in our early days of existence, but we have worked very hard to shore up areas of weakness and to take on as much responsibility as we can. And I am very confident that today you will find our processes and procedures in line with your expectations. I'm leading a dedicated team of professionals who are working tirelessly to achieve both the goals that you have created for us and the internal goals that we strive to achieve every day. Each day we work on recruiting and building the most talented team possible in order to make this program successful. Under the direction of the chairwoman of the board, Mrs. Sue Swenson, we have implemented a culture measured by results, while always remembering who we are working for. The network that we will deploy is public safety's network, and this is the key principle that guides our work each day. The pace at which we are working is very high, and this leads to a demanding but rewarding work environment. FirstNet resembles a startup, and we have a team that has rolled up its sleeves and is focused on consultation and our acquisition that will result in the successful deployment of a nationwide public safety broadband network. Having a wireless startup inside of government is a challenge that we are overcoming, and you are able to see the progress that we have made. Since the release of our strategic roadmap in March of 2014, we have been doing something unusual. We are actually doing what we told you we would do. We released a plan, and we're sticking to it, and we're meeting the goals that we set out to achieve. Since we last testified before this subcommittee in November of 2013, we have accomplished the following. We released 13 RFIs, which examined numerous aspects of the network. We published a statement of objectives with a comprehensive network RFI. This brought together all the information that we had received into a single document. We conducted 3 public notices addressing various aspects of our enabling statute, and in April we released a special notice with draft RFP documents. We have been consulting with states and territories and conducting an enormous amount of outreach to our stakeholders. While we have taken great strides in the right direction, significant work remains, and we at FirstNet are committed to completing the mission that Congress has given us. One area that I believe we have improved on is engaging with our Public Safety Advisory Committee, known as the PSAC. A lot of the credit for this improvement must go to Chairwoman Swenson and the PSAC Chairman, Chief Harlan McEwen. The PSAC is actively engaged in task teams that are working on critical topics such as priority and preemption, public safety grade, and end-user devices. The 40 members of the PSAC are public safety's voice with FirstNet, and by leveraging it, we will ensure that we integrate public safety into the fabric of the network at every stage of planning and deployment. Our consultation and outreach efforts have been impressive, but more work remains to be done. We have held consultations with 35 states to date, with a further 15 scheduled. In fact, Mr. Chairman, your home state of Oregon was one of our early consultations, and we have seen an impressive outreach and organizational structure in Oregon and many other states. FirstNet is collaborating with states in public safety to conduct outreach and consultation, and are leveraging the state and local implementation grant program that has helped fund these important efforts throughout the country. As we work towards the end of the year and the planned release of the comprehensive network RFP, the consultation process continues to inform the composition of the RFP, and so it is very important that states are involved at every stage of development of the network. States have many avenues for consultation beyond our in-person meetings and regular conference calls. States can have significant consultation feedback through the responses to our public notices and our draft statement of objectives. I have directed the organization to focus on these very 2 topics in 2015, consultation and our acquisition of the network. These are our top priorities to meet the requirements of the Act. FirstNet currently has a number of draft RFP documents open for public comment, and we have been very encouraged by the feedback that we received up to this point from both industry, from public safety, and from states. Mr. Chairman, it is the mission, that of deploying a much-needed nationwide public safety broadband system that our first responders deserve, that has me excited to come to work every morning. This is not an easy task, but is extremely rewarding to the hardworking team members of FirstNet, and we all understand the critical importance to our country of getting this right for public safety.
Mr. Kennedy, thank you for your leadership and that of your teams and the progress that you're making and your forthright commitment to do what you told us you'd do. That's novel. We were just suggesting we'll bring you back more often. Now we'll go to Mr. Stu Davis. We got a few other agencies we can assign you to, too. State Chief Information Officer, Assistant Director, Ohio Department of Administrative Services. Mr. Davis, we're delighted to have you back before the subcommittee. Please go ahead.
It's good to be here. Good afternoon, Chairman Walden, Ranking Member Issue, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on FirstNet and the National Public Safety Broadband Network. As State CIO, I also chair the Multi-Agency Radio Communication System, or MARCS, Steering Committee, Ohio's land mobile radio system that supports voice and data communications for statewide public safety and emergency response. And I also chair Ohio's Next Generation 911 Steering Committee as well. I first testified before you in November 2013 and expressed concerns that the Ohio General Assembly had about FirstNet. It called for this subcommittee to continue these meetings, and we commend you for doing so. I also expressed concerns relative to some key components that are necessary for success. FirstNet has made significant progress in further defining and communicating the mitigation of these concerns. Regarding the state's relationship with FirstNet, it's important that FirstNet views this as a partnership. FirstNet has come a long way in this regard, and over the past year and a half, many states have had the opportunity to meet with representatives from FirstNet and discuss issues and concerns. FirstNet's message has been clear. They are listening, reacting to our concerns. Ohio's FirstNet consultation was held last week, and by all accounts was a positive interaction. From a planning and development perspective, states, including Ohio, have received planning grants to support stakeholder outreach, governance, and data collection activities in support of FirstNet. Ohio has been pursuing a regional or multi-state approach. The FEMA Region 5 states of Michigan, Minnesota, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Ohio have long been partners in the pursuit of obtaining the best possible public safety communication networks for the region. Region 5 states meet often on FirstNet, and we have found the same issues emerge for all of us. Local control issues, leveraging existing systems, next generation 911 integration, and of course, business models. At our request, FirstNet participated in these meetings and provided additional communication and a consistency in their message regarding interactions with the state. Their outreach efforts are appreciated. Region 5 has taken steps to identify assets that support emergency responder communication from tower to other technical infrastructure. Of course, there are necessary legal, financial, and jurisdictional considerations when leveraging public infrastructure. Due to the complexity of these considerations, recent FirstNet discussions have been around foregoing leveraging state assets, which is understandable. These considerations, multiplied by 50 states, will take an enormous amount of time and effort. However, leveraging MARCS towers in Ohio could greatly assist in achieving NPSBN coverage necessary. There are some continued concerns. The FirstNet business model is still somewhat undefined, and based on recent discussions at our state consultation, it will be defined by the successful bidder through the RFP process. A sustainable business model is critical to know and understand, and building the cost recovery and usage rates will be instrumental in the adoption of this effort. The FirstNet Chief Financial Officer recently discussed a potential user fee of $30 a month based on 4 to 13 million users. This sets an expected bar for fees and is close to what some current service providers are charging, but FirstNet should provide as good or better service at an equal or lower cost. As Vice Chairman Latta knows, we have MARCS users today that indicate that they cannot afford the $20 a month fee we charge. Additionally, further clarity around user community access and secondary use is required. Utilities are asking good questions and making a strong case regarding priority access and spectrum for the critical data systems they support. Their inclusion as partners on the NPSBN could also provide sustainability for that future business model. There continue to be concerns regarding coverage. Recent discussions have focused on the urban areas with a phased approach to address rural and remote areas. Currently, Ohio's MARCS service coverage is 97.5% of the state. We would expect at least the same from FirstNet in Ohio. I understand the reasons for this current focus, but I'm concerned in the long run the rural and remote areas of the state will be underrepresented. I will continue to press for a FirstNet coverage plan and schedule that clearly extends to these areas in Ohio. It's important to note that we are supportive of FirstNet and the nationwide public safety broadband network. Ohio is uniquely positioned to take advantage of the significant opportunity to coordinate and converge multiple efforts. These efforts include the upgrade to our LMRS, MARCS, and Ohio's next generation 911 system. I look forward to our continued partnership with FirstNet and ensure impacts to current initiatives are in alignment with Ohio's direction. Thank you for your time, and I will respond to any
Mr.
questions.
Davis, thank you for your testimony and that of Mr. Kennedy's as well. So, Mr. Kennedy, it appears there may be some conflicting information regarding the release of the final RFP, and I just would love to get some clarification. I understand FirstNet Chair Swenson estimated early 2016 when she testified before the Senate. Is that a pretty good estimate? Early 2016?
It is. I mean, we're shooting for the end of this year, but early 2016 is a very accurate estimate.
All right. You state in your testimony that FirstNet has received more than 670 questions to the draft RFP you just released, and the comment period doesn't close until July 27th. Sounds like a lot of stakeholders have a lot of questions. Given that level of inquiry, do you think you'll be able to hold on to the early 2016 release of the RFP?
Currently, we're still holding on to that date, and we've been responding to the questions that have been coming in. We actually released the first responses last week, and we're going to continue to respond to the questions on an ongoing basis so that those questions can be acted upon by the teams and the states and the public safety stakeholders who have been submitting questions. One of the things that we've done with the draft RFP is we've asked for feedback. And so both the questions and the responses that we hope to get by July 27th, we're expecting a lot of interaction, not just from vendors and industry, but also from states. And so we're excited to see the feedback that we're getting.
And I assume that's been a pretty helpful process.
It has.
All right. What do you see as, I was just reading through this document that we entered into record for the Rural Broadband Association and some of their concerns about special issues in the rural areas and being able to be a partner and maybe partnering, or conversely, if you end up commercializing some of the surplus spectrum, the effect that might have on the marketplace. Are those the sort of issues you're going to be addressing?
We are, and we've asked for, in the draft RFP documents, ways to address not just the urban and suburban areas, but rural areas as we look at rollout. One of the things with the capacity on the network, certainly there will be more excess capacity in the more rural areas.
Right.
We've also been working with groups like the Rural Broadband Association and many others to go out and reach out to the rural carriers and rural telecom providers and make sure that they're getting involved. We've been encouraging them to respond to the draft RFP.
Good.
And respond with solutions. And whether that's individually or that's as teams or working together in regions or different parts of the country, we are absolutely encouraging them to participate.
Because obviously, it just seems to me that the more you can minimize overbuild or prevent it altogether, the better, because you get to leverage the money that you have in the most effective way. So what are the next steps once the final RFP is released?
Once the RFP is released, there will be certainly questions that come in on the final RFP. We'll respond to those. We expect proposals to be returned after that. There's an evaluation period of those different proposals and the ranking and rating that would normally happen with an evaluation. And then any kind of orals or other parts that could take part is the evaluation process. These do take some time. As you know, with large federal procurements, we expect that this will take a significant amount of 2016 to occur. But we want to move with as much urgency for public safety as we can because we know they need this network and we want to move into deployment.
Our antenna always go up when we hear the IG is looking at an organization. I understand while they're done with their first audit, they're back looking at some of the federal issues. Can you elaborate a little bit about what they're looking at?
Sure. The most recent request was to take a look at federal outreach. Nothing out of the ordinary. We've been working closely with any requests that come from either the IG or the Government Accountability Office, and we've been definitely following up with them. And we expect that this to be a normal routine cause of business as we go through deploying this network.
And how soon before we'd see some form of deployment of the network after you get through the RFP and all?
We would expect that once the RFP is awarded, that we will move into that first phase of deployment. We currently have about 5 years of deployment that is in the plan, the way the draft RFP is scripted today. So we're expecting about a 5-year build-out post-award of the contract for the initial build-out.
All right. See if I had anything else. Yeah, in your testimony, you speak of a vision of developing a recapitalization model that will lead to the deployment of a fully self-sustained network. Could you describe this model and what it means from the perspective of public safety user states and states that opt out of the network?
Sure. The recapitalized model from an opt-in and an opt-out perspective is trying to make sure that the nationwide network, the core network itself, and the overall network will not be like a lot of past public safety projects where we invest a large amount of government grants and other funding into a system that cannot be maintained or upgraded into the future. As all of you know, you're currently using phones that are leveraging 3G technology, leveraging 4G and LTE, and we're going to be leveraging advanced LTE, 5G, 6G into the future. And so as we build this network, the goal is to make sure that we plan those costs and that recapitalization into the network costs, whether that's core fees related to an opt-out state or whether that's actual user fees and the covered leasing agreements related to opt-in states, and making sure that we have the ability to maintain and upgrade the network.
All right, my time's expired. Thank you again for your testimony and the answers to my questions. Turn now to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Eshoo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin my questions, I would just like to acknowledge the uniformed first responders that are in the audience with us here today. We salute you, we thank you for your service, and I will never forget how you were really the backbone of the effort moving the legislation through. So thank you for being here and for everything that you do for our whole country. Thank you. Mr. Kennedy, circling back to the GAO, what prompted the review? Is this something that is the IG review? Yeah.
We're not aware of anything in particular that prompted the review itself. We believe it's a routine course of business.
It's routine.
This was the next area that they wanted to audit, which was federal outreach.
Good. Okay. Well, we'll have to avail ourselves to the report and become familiar with it. We've had enormous struggles with interoperability in the radio space. And I want to make sure that the same thing doesn't happen again between FirstNet and NG 911. So can you tell us what FirstNet is doing to ensure that we don't have a standards mismatch between the LTE network built by FirstNet and our NG 911 systems built by states and localities?
Our statute clearly calls out and requires us to promote integration of the network.
It does.
Safety entering points
Yes,
in their-
the law does.
And we have absolutely built that into our draft RFP documents. We've leveraged it in our outreach, and we've worked very closely with the 911 community.
Good.
Today in the audience, some of the team from APCO is here. APCO has been very much a supporter of FirstNet in making sure that we maintain this integration focus that needs to occur between next-gen 911 and existing 911 and public safety answering point services. We're also bringing on a 911 subject matter expert onto the FirstNet team to make sure that we're very focused in reaching out to all of the dispatch centers and all of the communicators across the country so that their needs are included. And they're often at our consultations and our different discussions as we go across the country. So we believe that we are working very closely with the 911 community and that integration will occur.
Good. That's excellent. Mr. Davis, thank you for the work that you are doing. You gave quite an extensive report in your testimony. Thank you very much. I mean, it represents a ton of work, as my kids would say. How, in your view, do you think the whole issue of interoperability between FirstNet, the states, the NG 911 systems is working?
I think it's too early to tell from a state perspective. Right now, we're working through the technical requirements on how we would do that from a state perspective. Historically, that has come from local government, and we're trying to put guidance out to local government to make sure that they're following standards and the approach that we would take. I'm excited to hear you have a 911 expert on your team, because I'm sure we'll be reaching out and trying to leverage the technology and the standards that you guys will be implementing.
Beyond what you just shared, do you think that the atmospherics have become, I don't know what other word to use. I mean, there were tensions in the beginning, and on the part of some, a reluctance to be a part of this effort. Can you tell us anything about how that has improved? In your view, do you think that it has?
Significantly improved.
Good.
I think
That's wonderful.
in the
It's
last
so
year and a half,
important.
in terms of the outreach, the collaboration, the communication piece, 35 states, I mean, that says a lot when you're going out and talking to the states. And we do get together from regional perspective, we get together from even a national perspective, and we talk. And so that, and you know that, right? So the consistency of the message is very concerning for us to hear that, somebody said something in a different state, and that message is clear. The collaboration, I think, is there. The integration and the communication has been consistent, and I think things are moving in the appropriate direction.
And is there a comfort level to advise the board as to how, if there are ways to improve that? Do you feel comfortable saying so, or others?
I think there's always room for more communication, more transparency. I think it'll be interesting to see the responses that come back from the RFI and the sharing of the information and the comments that come back from that. I think that will be a significant assistance and help.
Great, thank you very much. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Delay yields back. Chair recognizes the Vice Chair of the subcommittee, Mr. Latta, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Davis, thanks again for being here today with us. Really appreciate it for the update. And Mr. Davis, I could ask you, I noted in your testimony that you advocate a regional approach to planning and development, capitalizing in part on the partnership between the states in FEMA regions and the history of that kind of collective work with regard to the land mobile radio communications. Would you be able to expand on that for us, please?
Sure. There is a long history of communication between the states in the FEMA 5 region. They all have land mobile radio systems that we share and share alike. And lessons that were learned in Minnesota are things that we, don't have to break our teeth on, if you will, in another state, in Ohio, for the example. So that communication came out, and it was really more about making sure that we could be heard through the process. In the early days in 2013, there were concerns that as a state, our voice might be minimized, and we felt that as moving into a regional approach like that, we could not be dismissed when you start to talk about the population that's served, the towers and the infrastructure that's there, and the way that those land mobile radio systems are working today. So there's been very, very strong communication between all of those coordinators in those states.
Well, just not between the states. Do you think FirstNet's doing enough to take advantage of that regional approach then that you've already been working on?
I think it's starting to take some root, if you will. I think originally there were some concerns.
Would you want to
maybe
elaborate on that?
I think originally, I think FirstNet was a little concerned, and this is my own perspective. I probably shouldn't say that, but I will. And then I think as they began to see the opportunity that really brought to the table, and we had FirstNet come to one of those Region 5 meetings, and it's a great opportunity for us to hear the same things and to get everything out on the table and have that constructive debate on how this thing is going to come together. And so I think that regional approach has been helpful. I would hope that TJ would say the same thing.
Would you like to comment, Mr. Kennedy?
Sure. As somebody who did go out to that Region 5 meeting, and I brought with me my director of consultation as well as director of state plans, the interaction was terrific. It was a nice snowy day in Chicago. We got together with all the states in Region 5, and I think what was very beneficial was the pros and cons from different states with different geographies and different issues and common problems and issues as well. And I think it made for a great dialogue and discussion. We've also been staffing up our consultation and outreach teams by region now, and we actually are leveraging the FirstNet regions, which are the same as the FEMA regions. So we're leveraging that kind of regional cooperation, much like Region 5 set as a good example. So we're taking that example and leveraging it in other parts of the country. We also did something this year that I think is even taking that to the next step, in that we held a nationwide single point of contact meeting. So both Stu Davis and all of the other single points of contacts from all the 50 states and the territories and the District of Columbia, we invited to a nationwide SPOC meeting where we all came together. Over, I think, 52 of the states actually brought different team members to that meeting, and we were able to share the differences in the issues and talk very openly in 2 full days of discussion. I think you could kind of rate the discussion by at 5 o'clock on the second day, everyone was still in the room having a very fruitful discussion. We had breakout sessions where we could dive deep into elements around the RFP or the public notices, and that kind of dialogue has been extremely helpful, I think, both for FirstNet, but also for the states, and I think that we both gained from it.
Let me ask Mr. Davis, I could, just on a follow-up. If you're going to look into the crystal ball and look into the future, where do we need to be with the states and FirstNet right now? You know, to be in the, where we want to be in the next year. What do we need to be doing? What else?
Well, I think right now, I think with all the planning that's going on from each individual state and that coalescing of all that information across at least the FEMA 5 regions, I think that's really on us to sort of get some of that together and make sure that we're getting it to FirstNet. I think that the next steps are really the schedule and how this thing comes out and how it gets rolled out at some point in time. Because, again, like I said, I'm concerned about the rural and remote areas of the state and to make sure that we have the appropriate coverages. I certainly understand the logic behind the approach that they're taking, but some of this can be done in parallel, and we just need to make sure we're doing it.
If I could just touch real briefly, and my time is about up, because especially when you're talking about the rural parts of the state, because, you know, when I look at my district, you know, in northwest, west central Ohio, I go from urban, suburban, to very, very, very rural areas. And especially when I'm out talking to my first responders out in the rural areas, there's always that question about coverage. And when you've talked to folks in, you know, the rural parts of Ohio, I don't care if it's in the northwest or the southwest or northeast or southwest, what are they telling you right now?
Well, they're all interested to know what kind of coverage they're going to have.
Right. And do they think that they will get that coverage?
I think that they do assume that that is. I think the original message that was coming out of FirstNet in the very early days was consistent coverage across the entire country. And, you know, obviously our fervent hope is that that actually happens. But the question is the timing for those rural and remote areas is going to be critical because, and that goes back to the business model as well, because how much are you willing to spend for what you're going to get from that out of the gate?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My time's expired, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask Mr. Kennedy first about JerseyNet, and then I wanted to ask a question about tribal land, so I'm trying to get this all in. Nearly 3 years ago, Hurricane Sandy devastated New Jersey. The natural disaster was compounded by communication failures across the state, and that is why I've been such a supporter of making New Jersey one of FirstNet's early builder projects. I know that early on, however, critics pointed to the struggles Governor Christie had getting this project off the ground as an example of why FirstNet couldn't work, and I believe that we have been able to turn this project around since then. I had hoped to ask one of the architects of the success in New Jersey about how he did it, because I thought his experience would help make other jurisdictions successful, but unfortunately the governor prevented him from being here today, so I have to ask you, Mr. Kennedy. What do you think of the progress JerseyNet has made, and can you elaborate on the lessons that FirstNet hopes to learn from New Jersey's early deployment of its public safety broadband network?
New Jersey and JerseyNet are currently deploying and testing their first sites this week, so the program is making terrific progress. And Fred Scalera and the team in New Jersey are very eager to get this project completed by September of this year. They are on track to do that. They've been working very closely with the FirstNet team as well and sharing lessons learned as they move forward. The project is helping drive a strong ecosystem of lessons learned across devices, looking at early devices and ways to leverage the network, and also looking at ways to use deployables so that in events like Hurricane Sandy in the future, those deployables could be moved into an area that has been affected by a natural disaster or other event and actually really leverage both capacity and coverage needs that may change due to those kinds of planned and unplanned events that occur. So I do believe that the JerseyNet system is a great platform for FirstNet to learn from. I do think the team is on track to complete the project by September of this year, and that we will be getting lessons of an operational flavor as early as fall of this year, and really look forward to that.
All right, FirstNet was created to be part of NTIA, which is part of the Department of Commerce. It seems to me, though, that you might be able to deploy the network faster if FirstNet was spun out of the agency. So do you think FirstNet has reached the point where it can stand on its own as an independent corporation? And if we're not there yet, what needs to happen first?
I think FirstNet has grown a lot from the early days. I believe that when we started, we relied very heavily on NTIA and the Department of Commerce for a lot of key functions. As we've been able to build up our staff, we've been able to take on some of those key corporate and governance functions of the organization. We've moved things like finance entirely into the FirstNet organization, and now we're looking at key elements like human resources and procurement and how that can be taken on by FirstNet in the future. So I do believe that we're maturing, and I do think that that kind of responsibility and accountability for FirstNet is something that we're growing into very much so.
Okay. I want to ask you about tribal lands. I try to bring up American Indian issues when I can. Nowhere is our nation's digital divide more apparent than on tribal lands. The lack of communications on tribal lands has not just had an economic impact, it's also led to real difficulties with public safety communications. And I think one of the overlooked virtues is its potential importance to improve deployment of broadband infrastructure to tribal lands. So how is FirstNet coordinating with tribal public safety entities, and how will FirstNet address areas like tribal lands which may have very little existing communications infrastructure?
FirstNet understands the special importance of reaching out to the tribal communities, and many of which have an acute need for broadband deployment. We have a tribal outreach lead that is full-time on FirstNet and does nothing but interact on a regular basis with the public safety community on different tribal lands, as well as the telecommunications and different elements of communications on the tribal lands and what they can do to help as FirstNet deploys. We've actually created a tribal working group on the Public Safety Advisory Committee. I personally have spent time meeting with them all day, talking about the issues that are different in tribal communities that need to be supported by FirstNet as we develop the network and deploy the network. I see a lot of desire for FirstNet to succeed with supporting tribal public safety. They've been very eager to work with us and help us understand their needs and desires. And I do think that our recent consultations in states like New Mexico just recently last week, and we're looking at specific tribal needs as we go through state-by-state consultations, really is a great opportunity for us to make sure that we get it right.
All right, thanks a lot. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the other gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Lance, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to the panel. New Jersey's project is notable for its use of deployable long-term evolution communications technology for its first responder network called JerseyNet. This mobile network system can be incorporated on towable trailers, SUVs, vans, and other platforms to be deployed quickly in emergency situations or natural disasters like Hurricane Sandy, or to places where communications are limited or non-existent. It's my understanding that rural areas, which comprise about 90% of the country in geography, are particularly vulnerable since there is no built-out fixed infrastructure. In this regard, and I go to you, Mr. Kennedy, could you provide guidance on how you plan to incorporate deployables into your build-out plans?
We have been looking at deployables not just for rural deployments where it may not be cost effective to have terrestrial elements. We want to have as much terrestrial in rural areas as well, but also from the capacity and the reconstitution of a network. There are special events that occur, large gatherings, Super Bowls, large sporting events, other things that will require an additional capacity in certain areas where deployables can be effectively leveraged.
All Super Bowls should be in New Jersey, Mr. Kennedy.
Absolutely.
It's on the record.
The temperature of Super Bowls in New Jersey and that time of year can be a little cold at some times.
No.
To throw that out. The need for Reconstituting a network after a natural disaster, though, is an excellent opportunity for deployables, where we can have deployables that are moved out of the way of a particular disaster if we have warning, and can move them back in to make sure that public safety can communicate immediately after a major event. It also is supportive of terrorist events or other events that may take out existing infrastructure, critical infrastructure. Lastly, there are many parts, as you mentioned, of the United States that are very rural, and it may make more sense to have deployable assets leveraging satellite backhaul and other elements to get to parts of the United States that are very difficult to get to. When I was a first responder, I was a police officer and a firefighter in very rural parts of Utah. I went to places that were not covered by cellular networks or land mobile radio networks in many cases. So having that ability to get communications much deeper into our rural communities for public safety is absolutely critical.
Thank you. Another topic, FirstNet has sought comments on the definition of public safety entity on 2 occasions. And as I understand it, based on press reports, there seems to be some debate among stakeholders. Mr. Kennedy, could you describe this debate and the implications of the definition of that term for FirstNet's deployment?
We've actually had a terrific, I think, conversation with both public safety, the states, and industry on the definition of public safety entity. It was in both our first public notice and our follow-up third public notice. We saw overwhelming support from the states. Many states, including Ohio, mentioned the elements related to leveraging a broad user base to support the network that public safety needs to have access to, but most importantly, that user base is somebody that needs to be contacted by the incident commander during big incidents. And if we look at emergencies that occur, everyone understands that police, fire, and emergency medical services are a part of our everyday public safety response. But also there are others, whether it is a utility worker, or whether it's to access some key transportation support on a major accident scene on an interstate highway. You may have other users that are in contact with public safety every day, supporting public safety operations, and most importantly, needing to be prioritized by an incident commander to be spoken to during those large emergencies when networks get congested. And so we've tried to be very clear on making sure that we get input from states on who should be on the network, and we've received a lot of input on that issue. We have not issued our final recommendation for the outer guardrails of that public safety entity definition, but I think with the tremendous amount of input that we've received, it's helped us build a broad definition that will cover what needs to occur and also be prudent in acting with the act.
In the press, there has been some discussion as to the difference between 6 million to 13 million users estimates. Could you give your best advice to the committee on that?
Sure. In general, our market research has shown that there's about 4 million public safety traditional users that would want to engage on the network if they were given that opportunity. And so we look at that as an addressable market. It's about 4 million police, fire, and emergency medical services personnel. The 9 million or up to 13 million number comes from those other types of users we just described. So Department of Transportation officials that may be supporting that. It may be buses or transportation that moves folks during an evacuation that is commonly needed when you have a hurricane coming into an area, or you're evacuating a hospital or a nursing home or other large facilities that you might need to evacuate during an actual emergency. Having that kind of broader public safety first responder community that can support that is important. And so that's where that other 9 million comes from.
Thank you. My time is done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lance. We'll turn now to a gentlelady from New York, Ms. Clark. Do you have any questions?
Well, I am curious. Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Dennis, thank you for testifying here today. Coming out of the New York experience in 9/11 and understanding that there have been a host of iterations of, ways of becoming interoperable, I want to know whether we are looking at how we maximize on the infrastructures that are already in existence, whether FirstNet will be an underlay of those systems, or are we talking about essentially putting those systems aside and deploying FirstNet as the main vein, if you will, of communications, not only in the New York region, but I guess across the nation. And I say that because I look at the major investments that have been made in a city like New York. A whole new 9/11 infrastructure has been put in place. There's a a lot of taxpayer dollars there. Is there a way that you have looked at the assets of various regions around the nation and looked at what could be amenable to the new deployment from a broadband perspective, or whether you see those being phased out basically over time so that this becomes sort of the primary tool for communication and coordination?
So to your 911 public safety answering point question specifically, I absolutely believe that the integration both with the existing public safety answering points and those that are upgrading to next-gen 911 is a key part of what we're doing, and that integration will leverage those investments that have already been made. When it comes to using voice capability with land mobile radio and using voice, video, and data related to LTE and broadband technology, I believe they're complementary. And I believe that the land mobile radio systems that agencies have today should continue to be maintained, and those systems are very valuable to public safety. It's what I've used in my career. It's a very valuable tool to public safety. I do think that broadband will bring a richness of applications and the ability to have not just interoperable voice communications, but interoperable data communications and be able to share more information across police, fire, and emergency medical services. So I believe that they are complementary to each other, and that the richness that you can get in a broadband environment will add to saving lives in different ways than we do today by being able to share video and sharing data much quicker, and in ways that in some cases we haven't even thought of the amazing applications that will be supporting our police officers, our firefighters, and our paramedics.
That was a good answer. My next question to you is for those parts of the country where you have sort of a voluntary first responder infrastructure. Have you thought about how the usage of FirstNet will be communicated? And are they already integrated into, I guess, networks of conversation around the deployment of FirstNet and how they will interact with it? Because, of course, they're primarily stand up their operations on a volunteer basis, but they play a very crucial role in responding in remote areas where there isn't necessarily a municipality that does so. Could you give us some insights into that as well, and any feedback you may have gotten from those communities?
Volunteers are absolutely critical in public safety. You can go to almost any state in this country, and volunteers are a backbone of what occurs in public safety. There are volunteer firefighters and EMTs across this country who serve big communities and small communities. There's communities in New York that are quite large that are served by volunteers every single day. And so they are a part of this network. They're a key component that are going to leverage this network. When we go out and do consultations, we're consulting with paid professional services, we're consulting with volunteer professional services, and we're making sure that they're at the table and invited and part of those conversations. One of the biggest things we hear is they want to make sure that they're able to buy service. And we've made sure in our definitions that volunteers are clearly called out as being able to buy service and be a part of that. And so we think they're a critical component and will greatly benefit from having cost and affordable devices that they can get their hands on, not just for voice communications, but also for applications and other uses as well.
And in the protocols that are, I guess, being established, is there a component of that that looks at the security of the system, and how is that being baked in? And also, how are you containing sort of access to that? Everyone in the nation is just concerned about cyber, and I just want to get your feedback.
Cyber is a absolutely critical element for us at FirstNet and with public safety, and we're trying to, and we have the unique opportunity as we develop a network that's going to be deployed, that we can start from the beginning and bake in security from day one. We brought on a security architect who is now part of our team who's focused on this. He's been leveraging the Department of Homeland Security and other key agencies that have a number of cyber efforts that are already underway. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're leveraging a lot of the best practices that are in place both in the private sector and in government today. But we want to make sure that the unique environment of a number of networks that have typically been stovepiped or separate, that when you bring them together, it is going to be absolutely critical that when we have all these different agencies that are leveraging this network, that not just cybersecurity, but also identity and access management will be a critical component of what we do. And it's going to be unique because we have folks at the local level, we have folks at the state level, and folks at the federal level who will be leveraging the network.
I thank you very much for your responses. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kennedy, you know, the law governing the FirstNet included a provision that would allow the states to opt out of FirstNet network and deploy their own network and then connect to FirstNet. So I've got a few questions about how this opt-out process will work, particularly given that the region of the nation, region of the state that I represent is very rural. So I have some questions. Given the projected release of the FirstNet request for proposal at the end of 2015 or the beginning of 2016, what is the likely timeline for governors to make their decisions as to whether their states will opt out or in to FirstNet?
The anticipated timeline would be late in 2016 to early in 2017 timeframe when they would be presented with a state plan. It is at the presentation of a state plan when a state governor then would have the opportunity to opt into the network or to take on that responsibility for themselves to deploy the radio access network in their state.
Okay, all right. Will the governors have all of the data points, such as specific costs per user, available to them in time for them to make an informed decision to opt in or opt out? And what are your plans to communicate the kind of information that the governors will need to make that decision?
Our plan is to do a very detailed RFP process that will produce the kinds of information that outlay the costs and the expected offsetting revenues that can support the network, and to drive all that information in addition to things such as coverage objectives into a state plan. It is that state plan that is that document that provides the information that will give them the ability to make that as an informed decision. And as part of the consultation efforts that are now started and ongoing, we expect ongoing conversations over the next 18 months on exactly these topics and to discuss them and to share information in a two-way dialogue so that when that state plan gets to the desk of a governor, it should not be the first time that they're hearing about it. Many folks, just like Mr. Davis here as a CIO, have been very actively involved for exactly this reason, in addition to wanting to see the importance of this network. But they have a job to inform their governors. They have a job to make sure that they're watching this closely and they're participating. One of the things that I've seen is the more that folks are participating, the more informed they are, and the more that we can share and have that kind of informed dialogue, and I think that is absolutely critical. Having CIOs, state public safety commissioners, and also local police, fire, and EMS leadership, in addition to the governors themselves, you know, learning and getting involved with FirstNet is one of the best ways to understand that key decision to opt into the FirstNet deployment of the network or to take on that responsibility to deploy it themselves in the state for the radio access network.
Well, let's say a state opts out. Are there revenues, and if so, what type of revenues might be available to them to help support their end of the network?
This is a complex topic in that there are revenues that could come from spectrum management lease agreements, both to FirstNet, but also for supporting that kind of deployment. But one of the things that we have explored in our second notice is exactly how this mechanism will work, and we're still digesting the comments that we've recently received on that, so there's more to come on that in the future.
Okay, great. Mr. Davis, you state that FirstNet has made significant progress in communicating with you on concerns that are being raised. So as we get closer and closer to the end game here, to the expected final RFP, do you have any specific recommendations on how we can improve this communicating process?
Actually, you know, the executive director, Kennedy, has been pretty transparent. I think the more transparent they are, the more that we have that conversation that's going on so that there isn't surprises in the end. And even if we know it may not be perfect, it's still better to know early so that maybe we can assist in that process. But I think right now, I think everything seems to be rolling along fairly well. The proof will be in the pudding as we get all of our planning documents together. There's been a lot of communication in Ohio with all different levels of first responders, the volunteer firemen, I mean, everybody. We have those meetings on a regional basis just within Ohio to communicate what's coming and what they should be expecting and what information we need from them so that we can be able to articulate that up.
In 10 seconds, let me ask you one final question. So who are the current users of the Ohio land mobile radio system? And once deployed, do you envision the public safety broadband network in Ohio to have a similar user base? And if so, why or why not?
There are quite a few folks. I think there's, right now today, I think there's about 50,000 users on our system. The majority of those are coming out of public safety and state agencies, as well as the sheriff's office and others in local law enforcement and emergency response. I think that right now, our network doesn't handle the data requirements that you'll see from FirstNet. I mean, that's the key, is getting access to the applications in a quick fashion. That push-to-talk component is a pretty critical thing. It is a closed system. We have other entities on there besides state and local government folks. I think the federal government has some process in there. Well, I think we have 3 towable towers that we pull into when there's emergency situations. But for the most part, that's focused on really that push-to-talk communication piece, and nothing is more important than somebody outside by himself being able to press a button and get a response.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri for 5 minutes. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Doyle. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony today. Mr. Davis and Mr. Kennedy, I've heard some concerns from some of the public safety community in Pennsylvania about who will qualify to use FirstNet and who will make the final decisions about eligibility. Beyond police, firefighters, and other first responders, there's other individuals and organizations that play an important role in emergency response. Shouldn't states ultimately decide who has both permanent and temporary access to the first responder broadband network? For instance, if a building's on fire and police or firefighters, they might find it very valuable to be able to communicate with the building security or those in charge with managing the evacuation. Shouldn't the incident commander in these cases be able to make the final decision about who has access to the network?
From our perspective, we've overwhelmingly heard that from states as well, and our current definition would allow them to do that. Our current definition would allow the incident commander to have access to all those type of entities that would allow them to communicate and handle that scene, no matter how large or small that it is. Our third notice was very much focused on that, and our third notice just closed last week. As we digest those comments that came in from states and from others, we will come out with a final determination, but our goal was to be very responsive to those requests that have come in from the states.
Great, thank you. Mr. Kennedy, first responders in Pittsburgh and many other cities across the country use the T-band for communications. And as part of the Spectrum Act, the FCC will reclaim that spectrum. Do you see the deadlines that are set for that process as being problematic for first responders that depend on that spectrum to communicate? Or do you believe FirstNet will be online in the affected localities in time to mitigate this shift?
There's a couple elements to this. We're aware of the concerns of those public safety jurisdictions using T-band spectrum today and the T-band relocations provisions that are part of the Act. It is the FCC, however, that's in charge of that T-band relocation, and it would be better for them to answer specific questions about timing and so forth related to that effort. FirstNet, we've been very focused on working with the international standards community, the 3GPP Community Third Generation Partnership Project, that is focused on making sure that we have a standards-based approach that goes to putting mission-critical voice in the future on our network. At deployment of the network, we are looking at having non-mission critical voice, or what you would look at as cellular type communications or over-the-top communications on broadband, and plan to offer that as part of the initial deployment. But when it comes to mission critical voice communications, we're really looking at leveraging those international standards to make sure that we only go to those key 7 functions that are part of the mission critical voice standards that are being done right now, and that they're implemented not just in the standards bodies, but that they're being utilized, and that public safety builds a trust up that those standards are ready for them, and public safety will decide when they're comfortable with mission critical voice on broadband in the future. So that is happening. The standards bodies municipalities are working to have that initial standard done by mid-2016. It will take some time for that technology to get into the actual technology ecosystem. And there are some other countries around the world that are actually looking at moving to mission-critical voice sooner than the United States that will be doing some testing. But for us, we want to make sure that public safety is confident in both the technology and in the standards, and that they've been rolled out, and that they're using the network for other purposes first.
Great. Gentlemen, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back. Now the gentleman from Missouri is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kennedy, it appears that in many rural areas, first responders will have to rely on roaming with existing rural wireless providers for network coverage instead of using the National Public Safety Broadband Network. How and when are you planning to address roaming coverage?
Roaming is certainly something that was envisioned in the Act, and we're allowed to enter into roaming agreements, but we're also looking at leveraging rural build-out milestones and making sure that we have rural build-out at every phase of deployment of the network. So we're looking at both the deployment that needs to occur, but also looking at when we get to a final RFP, what kind of efforts can be leveraged for roaming that is cost-effective that can be added to the network as part of that solution as we go forward.
Any speculation on how long that building would take?
As far as building the network right now, we've proposed in the draft RFP that 20% of the rural build-out milestones would be covered in each phase, which would be a year. So 20% in year 1, 40% in year 2, 60% in year 3, and so on. And so we believe that that will allow for ongoing rural build-out at each phase rather than saying it's all just waiting to the end, which is one of the concerns that we've heard. So we've tried to be very clear to proposers who are looking at bidding on the network that rural build-out is very important to us. We're also trying to encourage rural telecommunication and telecommunication firms to be a part of those solutions and to bid on the network and be a part of bringing solutions to the table that will allow that rural deployment to occur.
Okay. FirstNet's partners are allowed to use the excess capacity on the FirstNet network to offer wireless services to commercial subscribers. How will FirstNet ensure its partners do not compete against existing commercial networks, particularly in the high-cost rural areas where the population density often will not sustain more than one network to begin with?
One of the things in the Act is it requires us to look at the economic desirability of anyone proposing to bid on the network and look at the different approaches to both, leveraging different types of infrastructure, rural telecommunications infrastructure, existing government infrastructure, commercial infrastructure. And so we're going to look at what's most cost effective to deploy the network and also to have sustainability on the network. As part of those offers, they actually have to bring to the table what kinds of revenues would they bring to the table to offset the costs of public safety in both deploying, maintaining, and operating the network. And so it's important for us to look at the greater good of public safety and how they will be served by those covered leasing agreements or those agreements by potential partners or offers to leverage the network, whether that's in rural areas or in urban areas.
That's my next question. In terms of location, where will the service first most likely be available? Urban areas or urban and rural, or what can we expect?
It's urban and rural. And so just like I mentioned earlier, we want to have those rural build-out milestones at each phase. So certainly urban areas will get built out. Your largest number of population and public safety providers, public safety entities are actually in the more populated areas. But we also see that going to the rural areas. We want to make sure that those rural build-out milestones help drive that as an incentive to make sure that rural is built out at each phase.
And 3 years behind us, when do you think that FirstNet will actually start providing service?
I believe that FirstNet will start providing service as soon as we start to deploy the network and states and areas are actually built out and up and tested and on the network. Currently, we see the network starting to be awarded as far as deployment in 2017. And so you'll see it probably in the year after that you'll start seeing deployment of the network and actually being up and operating in different areas.
So you think that it'll be up in 2018?
I think parts of the network will be up in 2018, and it will continue to deploy on a regular basis. One thing with wireless networks is they're ongoing deployments, and so we have the initial deployment, which we're talking about a 5-year build out of that deployment from 2017 through 2022. But we also believe that the overall network will continue to grow after that there will be additional coverage that's added. There's additional capacity that's added. It's not a static network. So every part of the country that even has initial deployment will continue to add to that deployment as time goes on.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Colorado for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask, Mr. Kennedy, I wanted to ask you about some of the efforts in Colorado. As part of the successful AWS-3 auction, NIST, which has labs in Colorado, received $300 million for research on standards, technologies, and applications to advance wireless public safety communications. Now, my understanding is that this research is in consultation with FirstNet. So even though NIST only recently received the funding, I'm wondering if you can give us the status of those consultations.
I can. We actually met with NIST last week. One of the things that we have right now every June is a Public Safety Communications Research Conference, and that conference is done with NIST and the Public Safety Communications Research Lab at NIST. And it was held just last week, and literally over 500 key stakeholders came together to talk about the technical aspects and the different research and development aspects of not just the public safety network, but public safety communications in general. We actually sat down with the NIST team and started to consult and discuss on that grant program. Regular ongoing communications with both the NIST director and Derek Orr, who is the program director of the PSCR labs. I believe we work hand in glove with them, and that the team at NIST is very focused on bringing solutions to public safety on the LTE network.
Great. Okay, good. Now, you told some of the other members that FirstNet has worked hard to improve its outreach efforts to all stakeholders, including states, and as well as NIST. I understand you've had an official consultation with the state of Colorado. Can you tell me what's next for FirstNet in Colorado?
Right now in Colorado, we're asking them to start performing data collection, and I know that they're doing that. Brian Shepard, who is the single point of contact on the Colorado team, has been sending out communication to the public safety community in Colorado, and currently their data collection is due September 30th. And so they're working to gather that data on different public safety users, where are they located throughout the state, what kinds of 911 calls do they have, where do they need to respond to. And so that is the current activity that they're working on. Once that data is received, we plan to go back out and meet with states to validate that data and discuss what that data is telling us to become part of the state plan. And so that's what's going to be.
So that'll be sometime in the fall, you think, maybe?
In the
Didn't you
fall
say
would probably be
September
the follow-up to that after September 30th.
Yeah, right, okay. And lastly, Adams County, Colorado has one of the 5 early builder public safety projects. What lessons do you think you can learn from that project in Adams County?
Well, the good news is we've already been learning lessons from that project, and we look forward to the ongoing lessons now that the network is operational. They're one of 2 networks that are already operational. There's users who are on the network today, and they're looking to add a lot more users to the network. As those users come on board, we're going to be looking at network management of that particular network, how those users interact, and really look for key use cases for the benefits of broadband for public safety and how we can leverage that across the country with the nationwide public safety network.
Thanks. Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
The gentlelady yields back, and the chair now recognizes for 5 minutes the gentlelady from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our panel. Mr. Kennedy, I have a couple questions, or actually I have one question. Mr. Long asked my other question. My colleague from Missouri was hitting on some of the rural issues, and I'd like to follow up on a couple of those as well. Since FirstNet is proposing a nationwide and state and regional approach as potential paths for network acquisition, I'm concerned with how this affects the rural carriers in limiting their abilities to grow as well. They have smaller service territories, and I'm afraid that they're going to get cut out of the process. In addition, there's no clear incentive for large carriers to partner with the small providers to serve the rural communities. Large carriers lack presence and experience in these rural areas, and the smaller carriers are there. How is this process going to move forward? And how is FirstNet going to ensure that the effective and efficient creation of the network in rural areas is provided?
We have been really trying to outreach to the rural carriers themselves. We've been working with the different associations, whether it's the Rural Broadband Association, whether it's NRTC, many of the other different groups that support rural telecommunications across the country. We have been engaging them early on. We have been encouraging them to participate in our draft RFP that is out right now, as well as our public notices, so that they can share with FirstNet what their needs and desires are. Part of releasing a draft RFP, which is not required, was to get that kind of feedback, both from states, but also from industry. And industry includes the rural telecommunications providers. And we want them to come forward with solutions that will help make it cost-effective to build out further into rural areas, that will make the operations and sustainability of FirstNet a success, because that's a requirement of the Act, and to make sure that as we look at things like rural build-out milestones, that's one of the things that we're looking for comments on, and we expect to receive comments on that. We think it's really important. We've asked for a definition of rural set of comments and a public notice. Lots of communication from the rural community on that as well. So I think that we've heavily engaged both public safety entities that are in rural areas, as well as the rural telecommunication entities, to be a part of making this network a success. We think that whether it's teaming, whether it's bringing folks together, whether it's coming up with unique and innovative business models that will support that we've looked at different ways that we can and are continuing to get input on that. We actually have, as part of our RFP, have laid out ways that people can put themselves forward to team with others, so that different parts can get together and make sure that they can be a viable entity to bid on different parts of the network and be a part of the solution.
Great, thank you, Mr. Kennedy. I yield back the remainder of my time, or if anybody wants it, I've got about 2 minutes left.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Mexico for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so very much, and to Mr. Davis, Mr. Kennedy, thank you both for being here. Mr. Kennedy, as you know, before the establishment of FirstNet, my home state of New Mexico was the recipient of a BTOP grant to support the development of a public safety wireless system. And it's my understanding that FirstNet and New Mexico have reached a spectrum licensing agreement in this space. Can you give us an idea if this is indeed going to be completed by September 30th?
To my knowledge right now, from CIO Darrell Ackley, who is leading the New Mexico team, and his staff, Jackie Miller and others who are working on that BTOP project, they're on track to meeting their September 30th deadline. I know there's a lot of work to be done, and they're working hard to make that happen. We know that they've been collaborating to get those sites on board, and they've also had a significant part of that project that was already deployed for microwave backhaul and other elements that are the backbone of that system. So we're really looking forward to additional lessons learned coming out of the state of New Mexico. You have some unique issues with the border that we're also learning to get some key learnings out of, and so really excited and looking forward to that project coming online.
Well, since you went there, Mr. Kennedy, I'll jump right to that question that I had for you. Is New Mexico is one of the many states that has a complexity of jurisdictions with local, state, federal government, as you named, and namely being a border state with a border and customs as well. Has the dynamic presented any unique challenges that you've seen or that you anticipated?
I think there's two things. One, certainly challenges related to spectrum on the border. Mexico is looking at different ways to deploy broadband for their government needs, including public safety, than the United States as far as their band plan. There's been some very positive announcements on the northern border that Canada is actually matched up with our same exact spectrum that we're utilizing for the FirstNet network for their public safety first responders. So we're in much better shape there as far as dealing with those issues. So that's an issue that's ongoing when you get on the border. I will say that there has been collaboration and cooperation on sites near the border with the federal government and federal law enforcement agencies that work on the border with the state of New Mexico. And I think working through some of that key early engagement and discussions has been very positive, both for those federal law enforcement agencies and for the state of New Mexico. And the lessons learned from that engagement hopefully can be applied to other parts of the border in New Mexico, as well as other parts of the southern border in the country. So that kind of relationship building and discussions and working through the details to get sites online, I think will be very beneficial to this project.
And you've heard a lot of questions from those of us that represent rural states as well. What lessons learned in a state with geography like we have in New Mexico, where it's large and land-based as well? We have amazing mountains and ski areas as well. So sometimes that gets in the way of transmission of some of the communication services, where you can drop service here and there because it's such a big state. So what have we learned that we'll be able to deploy in other states?
Sure. I mean, as somebody who has been a state trooper in Utah and understands some of the rural geography that you have in New Mexico and has traveled to New Mexico, I think it's really important that we understand that there are many areas that are very difficult to communicate with today, and the needs are critical for public safety to have additional communication avenues, both in land mobile radio and in cellular and LTE communications. I think that the kinds of things we're looking at in different communities in New Mexico today with the initial build-out will be helpful, but because your geography and terrain is so varied, I think that, all the different things that we need to bring forward for options and solutions to serve very rural areas are going to be critical for New Mexico and all the rural states. And I think as we move forward, finding unique solutions that can leverage very long ways of dealing in rural areas, we're looking at boomer sites as one of the unique elements that we have that can cover large areas with a stronger cell site that can do that. We're looking at high-powered mobile devices. We're looking at satellite backhaul in some areas and deployable units. So many different ways to try to serve rural communities, all of which I think will be important for New Mexico and many states that have the same kind of terrain.
And in your testimony, Mr. Kennedy, you also outlined the establishment of a tribal working group and hiring a tribal liaison as well. Can you provide more detail on FirstNet's efforts to ensure robust tribal consultation? And in addition to that, I understand that you recently had a session in Santa Fe, New Mexico. If you could let us know what next steps are.
Sure. I think the establishment of that tribal working group has been very successful. Early on in FirstNet's existence, Chairman Ginn appointed Kevin McGinnis, one of our board members, to be the tribal liaison from the board. Kevin has been actively involved in making sure that tribal communities are involved every step of the way with FirstNet. We've gone so far as even making sure that we reach out. We recently had some public notices and actually sent notices to all of the recognized tribes to make sure that they give us input, and we've received input from tribal communities as part of that. And so we're looking forward to continuing to try to have that involvement. When I talked earlier about the 56-state SPOC meeting where we got all the single points of contact together, we actually invited the tribal working group to that meeting as well. And we had sessions where the tribal working group met with states. These breakout sessions had 15 or 20 states in there and talked about issues that affect tribal communities related to public safety broadband and shared their concerns and how to get each side to be more involved with each other. So I think we've done a great job of trying to bring them together, but there's a lot more to do as we continue to develop and deploy the network.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman and welcome Mr. Kennedy and Mr. Davis. One of the early builder projects is in the eastern end of my district, Harris County, Texas. Population 4 million people. The third most populous county in America, #1 in Texas. The last 2 weeks back home have been pretty rough. We had a 100-year flood on Memorial Day with homes being lost, businesses being lost. Tragically, a few lives are lost, including one woman in my district. And now Tropical Storm Bill has rolled ashore a little bit south of Harris County. Made landfall about 150 miles south, meaning the worst side of the hurricane, northeast quadrant, is hitting my hometown directly. We're managing, but we can always use more weapons in this battle. Bill came ashore between Palacios, Texas, a population of 4,661, and Port O'Connor, Texas, booming with 1,253. Those two towns can respond like Harris County, Houston can to a crisis. And that's why I'm so excited about what FirstNet promises. But FirstNet starts with these early builder programs, like in Harris County. So my question is, Mr. Kennedy, the recently released GAO report recommended that FirstNet develop a plan to better evaluate the early builder projects and capitalize on the experience gleaned from them. What is the status of those recommendations, sir?
So first of all, we've put together that evaluation plan to incorporate those lessons learned. We've received many lessons learned from each of these projects, including Harris County. We most recently even had the Harris County team up to our Reston headquarters here in Northern Virginia, meeting with both our technical team and our RFP team and sharing those lessons that they've learned so far to make sure that they're incorporated both into our acquisition and into our overall plans and procedures and development of the network. Mayor Parker, who is the mayor of Houston, is on our board. Our board is made up of an amazing group of talented individuals, both from the wireless and telecommunications industry, also from state and local government, and from public safety, police, fire, emergency medical services, and sheriff's departments. That board, including Mayor Parker, are giving us advice on the deployment of this network and how critical this is. And we know she's been quite busy, as well as all the officials in Texas that have been dealing with your recent flooding and the ongoing issues that are affecting you there. We think that is a absolutely perfect reason why we need to deploy this network and move very quickly and with focus to have consultation so that we can take in these lessons learned, to work through the acquisition as the act requires us to, so that we can deploy this network as quickly as possible for public safety.
Have there been real surprises, something that came out of nowhere? Whoa, what happened here? I mean, any big surprises, or things marched along, challenges, gotten through them, over them, anything we should be concerned about, some challenges that came out of nowhere? Like, I mean, real world example, right now back home, we have real big problems. FirstNet could be a big part to solving those problems. And so, any idea if we had some big problems that you might want to help out us here in Congress, or are you guys doing all right now?
As far as big problems, I don't think there's necessarily been unforeseen major issues, but there have been things that we were worried about that have come true. So as a good example, the intricacies in working through memorandums of agreement and understanding to get sites and access to sites that are government sites to help build the network. Very time consuming, can be political at times, and take a lot of time and effort to put some of those in place. And so that's just one example of more than 60 lessons learned that we have from these early builder projects so far. We continue to incorporate those in our development. I think the time that it takes to consult and work through acquisition takes time, but we're working through that as quickly as we can.
As you build FirstNet through early builders, are there any insights to use actual real-world situations like what we had in Harris County, Texas the past month as a real-world example, how this thing can save some lives, get this thing up and running? Any efforts to try to include real-world examples in your going forward with the early builders program and then FirstNet?
There are. We've asked for actual use cases and lessons learned that are real-world use cases that are coming out of these projects. Many of them are not live and on the air yet today. Harris County and AdCom are two that are, but they have a small number of users in some cases that are on the network today. And as they continue to add users, I suspect we'll have more life-saving examples that we can bring forward. These projects were funded through the Broadband Technology Opportunities Program pre-FirstNet, but because they're leveraging the FirstNet spectrum, it's something that we're going to be able to get those kind of use cases and be able to share them with public safety across the country.
And that's important because most of these homes that were lost and lives lost were lost in small towns, suburban towns, but small police force, not capable like the big Houston police force or my police force in Sugar Land, Texas, where I live. And so please, get going. We need this. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me. In a prior life, I was the county executive of Erie County, the largest upstate county in New York, 44 cities, towns, and villages, and 100 separate volunteer fire companies. I went through 7-8 years ago the whole issue of low band, 400 megahertz, 800 megahertz. I was the one that killed the 800 megahertz plan in New York State. When they came to our county where it had to work as the largest upstate county, in my talking to the volunteer fire folks, first of all, we knew it probably wouldn't work, and secondly, we had no money to implement it anyway. So I pulled the county out. That cratered the whole thing across New York State. So talk to me as though I'm this local volunteer fire guy. I just went from low band to 400 megahertz, and it works. It works really, really well. I knew 800 megahertz was a disaster. Now, tell me what my life's going to look like 5 years from now. Do I have to throw all my radios away? Am I going to go to 700 megahertz? Am I going to go to a 4G LTE? Who's going to buy me my equipment? Our emergency services, Central Police, I was county exec when Flight 3407 went down. I've had floods. I had blizzards. It was critical that we all talk to each other. Rural areas, some of our areas, believe it or not, do not today have cell coverage. So tell me what my life's going to look like. Made it really simple. I'm the volunteer fire chief. What's my life going to look like 5 years from now? Tell me what it's going to be.
When we've been out talking to a lot of volunteer firefighters and EMS personnel, most of them carry a personal smartphone today or a cell phone today, if they have coverage. To your point, there are still some areas without coverage, but let's assume they're in an area that has coverage.
No, I don't know. Mine in particular doesn't.
Okay. So as part of the
That's my excuse. When someone reaches me, I tell them I'm out in Wyoming County and, sorry, I just lost coverage. And they go, oh, I understand.
And really,
Or
we
talk
want
to
them
me as both ways, but
so
all right.
if you're in a rural county, we want you to participate in the New York State consultation process. We want you to be a part of that consultation process, get your needs on the table for the New York State plan. As we talked about a little bit earlier in the hearing today, our goal is to work with New York State to bring forward a plan for New York State that has coverage objectives, that has data coming back from our request for proposal process on costs and deployment and coverage and those kind of key elements that will come to the table. And every state has a different set of issues. We heard from New Mexico and border issues. You have border issues in New York State as well, but different issues on the northern border and the southern border. So we want all those to be captured as part of that plan. And then coming forward to them is they will have the opportunity to buy service if it meets their needs. So for the average volunteer fire chief in your communities, if we provide the coverage at the cost that they are willing to pay for, they can do that. And if we don't, then we have not met their needs.
You know, excuse me, here's the big issue. There's separate budgets, in some cases, no budgets. As I said, we have 100 separate volunteer fire companies. We have 44 separate cities, towns, and villages. This is one county. You know, this all sounds good, but you know, the tail wags the dog. I've got this small community. Who's going to buy me my new stuff? I have no budget for anything, and yet I can tell you as county executive, I needed every one of them to be listening to the same channel. I needed every one of them to be able to respond, which is why we went 400 megahertz, across the board, no ifs, ands, or buts. The county paid for the equipment. We took them off a low band, killed the 800. It works perfectly. So now it's like we turning this all upside down, and if I've got to start over, one thing I can assure you, New York State doesn't exactly talk to the localities. They may talk to New York City, they don't talk to the other localities. That's what happened on the 800 megahertz, which was a debacle. I mean, should I be worried if I'm a county executive, if I'm Commissioner of Central Police Services, if I'm the Commissioner of Emergency Services? I just kind of see, in a perfect world, this is great, but boy, we don't live in a perfect world.
I think you should look at it as an opportunity that FirstNet will have to provide the kinds of services at a cost that can be afforded in those rural counties, and that we can expand coverage that will give them coverage that they don't have today, and try to meet those needs that they would want to partake in the service. We will be judged on whether or not we provide that kind of service and meet their needs. One of the things I think that is very important, and you mentioned this, is we will be building an operable system that will be interoperable between all those different agencies from the very beginning. Doesn't matter at what level they are, doesn't matter if it's police, fire, emergency medical services, emergency management, transportation, and that will be the opportunity will be to partake in a system that has those abilities.
I've got 4 seconds, but what do you envision? I'm not talking about just the beginning. Are we going to be there in 5 years? Is it 10 years? Is it 20 years? What?
I think right now we're planning a 5-year deployment that will start when the RFP is awarded in early
Well,
2017.
deployment's different than now. It's working. It's just like 400 megahertz. Don't even think about it. Take out my radio. Everyone's listening.
You have two different types of systems, land mobile radio and LTE. They're not exactly the same. And so it's not necessarily a replace. It's maintain the existing radio networks that you have now and leverage broadband as it comes forward. As public safety builds trust in that network, they will leverage and utilize.
It's part of the key. So my time's expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes 5 minutes. The gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, and thanks for staying. Usually I can get done earlier, but it's kind of good that I was kind of last, because I was going to follow up on a little bit of what my colleague from New York mentioned and some other concerns. Thanks for being here. Testimony's been great. Mr. Davis, thank you, because you give me a little more comfort having someone more local through the state, because, you know, the basic debate the last couple of years was to make sure our first line responders had a dedicated system by which we could communicate, and then bring on hopefully new technologies and devices with how the world changes so quick. Mr. Kennedy, you've been very articulate, and I think that's been helpful. But I always get concerned when we use the terms government business model, independent corporation. I'm not sure I've seen the federal government be able to operate that without challenges. So I don't want to be the fly in the ointment, but it really follows up on some of Mr. Collins' comments too, because it's not just he's trying to get a picture of where we're going to be, but he also said, you know, for the local devices, we've got obviously the radio communications, but of course we're talking about broadband and the issue of how do you eventually get to hardened commercial devices, which I don't know we talked much about. He did mention who's going to pay for this. And so when we have a network with $7 billion in capital to deploy and be able to match the coverage, capacity, apps, and functionality of the commercial network, the commercial networks spend about $20 billion or more a year in upgrades. How are we going to do this? If you only have 7, and the commercial side spends 20 yearly to keep up to date, aren't you a little concerned?
This is a complex funding mechanism to make this work, but I do believe Congress has come up with a very unique model that is doable. We have 3 major funding sources: the $7 billion in construction funding that you discussed, leveraging the excess capacity on the 700 megahertz spectrum that is part of the network, which is absolutely critical. One of the elements in the act is called covered leasing agreements, which allows us to lease that excess capacity to be able to leverage that funding both in deployment and maintenance and operations of the network.
And that'll be leased to other users?
As part of the RFP process, that's allowed to be leased to commercial users who can go ahead and then resale that network to consumers, which we're not allowed to do as part of the network. That resale or that covered leasing agreement, the way it works in there, is a much larger portion of the funding than the $7 billion portion. Those 2 elements, along with fees, user fees for the most part, core network fees, those are the 3 elements that will come together to make this a successful network. Also, we're going to have to provide a network to public safety that meets their needs. We're going to have to meet the key objectives of public safety for reliability, for resilience, and providing devices, both commercial devices and hardened devices that will meet their needs. One of the things we've seen in the commercial networks today is that they have a larger variety of devices that can meet the needs for both voice, video, and data. And we believe that rich ecosystem on a nationwide scale with millions of users that can come forward and create devices that are cost-effective will be able to bring down those prices that the ranking member mentioned earlier to very affordable prices for devices, both for vehicles and for individuals.
Can you give me some comfort that in 10 years we don't have we'll have maybe a somewhat vibrant LTE system and the rest of the world has moved on?
I think very similar to my earlier comments that we're planning on building a recapitalized network that can be upgraded and maintained into the future. Part of the reason we've been so focused on the 3GPP standards and sticking with international commercial standards for building this network is that we will continue to upgrade and maintain the network for those new standards as we move to 5G and 6G in the future.
Well, we want you to be successful. We wish you good luck, and we look forward to following this, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back, and I believe we have exhausted all of our members here to ask you all questions, but I know I want to thank you for your time today. I want to also from Chairman Walden and also the ranking member, the gentlelady from California, for your time and your answers today. It was very, very informative. And judging from the folks that were in the audience today, that you had to fight for a seat. So, but I really want to thank you for your time and your effort for being here. Mr. Davis, thanks very much for coming in from Ohio on pretty short notice. Mr. Kennedy, again, thank you for your testimony today. And if there's no further business to come before the committee, we stand adjourned.